Alright guys, so in this video I played Far Cry 2 in 2023 for the first time. I'll be giving an overall review and my thoughts on the game to let you know if it's still worth playing in present day. The game will be turning 15 years old in October, so I'm sure many people who haven't played it or just thinking of revisiting the game are interested in seeing if it still holds up. If you go on to enjoy this video or find it helpful, then make sure to hit that like button down below, and if story video games are your thing, then maybe even considering subscribing to the channel as well. I've done plenty of reviews on various games, with mostly Far Cry at the moment, as I am playing through the entire series and reviewing each one. With that being said, let's check out the second entry in the series, Far Cry 2. Now, due to the game releasing 4 years after the first game, Far Cry 1 or just Far Cry, a good amount of features were improved, added and even removed in this game. As soon as I started my playthrough, it was extremely clear that this game looked and felt a lot better in my opinion. I'm not gonna lie, I was very skeptical at first. If you don't know, Far Cry 2 surprisingly removed the talkable protagonist, and it lets you choose your own character with a handful of options to play as. Overall, it makes no difference, and you don't learn about the character you choose or their backstory throughout the game's story, only a brief sort of description to go off when you flick through them all. None of them affect the choices or ending of the game, and as I said, none of them talk. Now yes, I didn't expect, not because I'm not used to that, there's many other games that do this, like in Skyrim for example, which is of course one of the biggest story games ever, which I've recently done a review on, and should be in the description of this video, so it can for sure be done right. However, it was mainly surprising as it was a completely different thing to Far Cry, where you play as Jack Carver, and although not having a huge personality who you really connect with as his character develops, he did have a lot of dialogue and cutscenes which added to the game. Far Cry 2 does implement a decent amount of characters, a lot of them known as buddies, which I'll talk more about later, but your character that you choose does interact with a lot of them in terms of the conversations and them talking to you or giving you orders, even a lot more than the first game. So it was slightly strange as to why there would be no main protagonist, and the story is heavily reliant on the other characters, that being just the random people you meet or help along the way, and mainly down to the antagonist of the Jackal, who is of course seen as a bad person who straight away, with no hesitation, your main goal is to take him down. His character isn't entirely evil or a villain. This is seen as you progress through the game to points where he has some sort of slight respect towards you as your character, and many moments from him that you may not expect, which I won't really say more about. Another surprising aspect in terms of the story of the game, due to him being the antagonist and his character playing a vital role, with there being a no dialogue protagonist, you would assume that he would automatically be a really evil and relentless person with no remorse. However, I did like having this type of character in the game. This persona is what makes not only his character interesting and unique, but pretty much the whole story of Far Cry, which is even more prominent when the focus is of course taken off the main character you play as, to keep you invested to what this antagonist is really like and what the meaning is. Now the story is basically what I've already mentioned. Your main goal and target is the Jackal. You are assigned to kill him from the get-go, however it isn't as simple as that after you catch malaria in the first 7 minutes of the game. Then this automatically strays away from the main goal and becomes a lot more confusing, if I'm being honest, if the no talking wasn't enough. It does seem like there's a lot of areas that aren't really needed, where it's just your character killing everyone in every place which serves no benefit. Because of all this, I wouldn't say it's the most engaging narrative ever, but it did make it fun to play in, and at least try to figure out what's going on or how it's going to turn out in the end. Now in terms of the overall world of Far Cry 2, it's set in Africa, meaning it was very different from the first game, which was based on Micronesia, being set on a collection of islands. This Africa setting in Far Cry 2 does make you feel a lot more invested, or at least it did for me, with of course the help of the story and gameplay, but just how the game's setting makes you feel very on edge, and as you play through the game with your character, it really highlights that endurance because of how much the setting is just engulfed with violence and civil war, which is in almost every mission you play, because as I mentioned, for some reason your character always finds a way to stumble upon an abundance of random enemies or guards, with no choice but to obliterate them all in his path. I love the variety in areas and the different terrain featured, which you will notice a lot due to the amount of car and or buggy driving in this game, which I'll also get into. Of course it isn't mind-blowing, and there could definitely be more colour or just overall more in the world. This is all because it released in 2008, but still was a huge improvement from the first game, and that was 4 years prior, which as I said in my review, that game looked great for its time, so this one for sure does as well. The graphics and lighting look great with fairly decent view distance for its time. Of course it's so so clear that the trees do load in as you get closer, even when you aren't that far away, but this is of course expected. And to improve it, you can always install mods on PC to improve the quality in terms of textures, lighting, etc. And it even adds some to the gameplay as well, with much more dialogue, for example, that adds on to your mute character, which is amazing, to be honest. Now, a lot of these mods can of course improve the performance and the vast array of bugs, with many patches for the PC version. This is expected with how old it is, and it's not, being updated for a long time, but instantly, even in the car drive opening, almost every character you talk to randomly starts either bobbing up and down or even just floating in the air and then falling to the ground in front of you, swaying from side to side ferociously, which can become very annoying due to how often they happen, almost every interaction. And what's even more common is the audio and dialogue bugs, with a character constantly repeating a line or not being able to finish their line because they turn their body ever so slightly, so then they restart the line again, which does easily become frustrating, and especially when it won't let you leave a room if you don't talk to them. These are just a few of the bugs from the game that I noticed myself, so I'm sure there's so many more, but it does definitely take away the immersion of the game, and it is very annoying because it happens all the time. Usually bugs in games are occasional and don't take away the engagement as much, but for Far Cry 2 it's unfortunate that it does. However, after all this I still didn't want to stop playing, and it was still a lot of fun. Now I do want to talk about the gameplay of Far Cry 2 compared to Far Cry 1. There's a lot of new gameplay features involved, and they definitely want to have fun with the mechanics from the first game. I feel like they went with a very safe route beforehand, as it was the first one in the series, but also along with the limitations as it was so old. In Far Cry 2 there's so many little details that were so different, not just from the first game but any game I've played, in terms of, for example, the shooting mechanics. The most prominent feature, and probably the most unbearable feature for many people, would have to go to the weapon jamming. Now with the amount of gunfights in this game, this will probably happen a lot, and probably too much, which can easily take away the interest for some players. This is due to the durability of guns, which need to be upgraded, or you'll have to find or buy newer ones to avoid jamming. Unlike in Red Dead 2 for example, where all you have to do is clean your gun after a period of time with gun oil, otherwise it will just do less damage, but apparently that was too unrealistic for this game, and if you leave your gun from being upgraded, then when you go to shoot it, it will become jammed, and now you won't be able to shoot or reload your weapon, only until you eventually, the bullet comes out of the chamber with, okay, yes, it eventually does go back to normal and you don't have to upgrade it or find a new one straight away. But with the gunfights being so intense and ruthless in this game, and that short period when your gun does become jammed, it can cost you a lot. However, I found it cool and very realistic, and I'm sure many others would as well. It's very realistic and adds to the immersion, because it's not just you spraying at your enemies, sometimes you have to think and time your fights well, which becomes a lot of fun on top of the already intense fights. While your gun jams, the enemies can become increasingly closer or just ready to shoot you when you eventually go back in. So it's a very unique feature which is not common even in newer games. Another point as to why the games were ahead of their time, not only the jamming, but when you constantly keep shooting after your gun jamming a few times and not upgrading it, then the weapon will literally just break and burst in mid-fight, so you can't use it again as it's just exploded right in front of you, just adding to this realism and engagement. But as mentioned, the frustration to some players can also come with it, which even though it's a small feature, can stray people away from the game. Now the same as in Far Cry, they didn't really learn, and the apparent stealth feature is also stripped entirely from this game, and there's very little to no point in even trying, as you won't get far, which is a shame, as I do like a fair amount of stealth situations that sort of balance out with the intense fights in all games really, even if it's just a few. But I did try my hardest, and some points it's pretty much certain that enemies will spot you right away, just like in the first game. And if you want to take down an enemy silently and stealthily, then there isn't even a separate animation to do so. So it's not like they're exactly promoting this feature, they really just want to go all out guns blazing, which makes sense with the overall gameplay style. Another feature similar to before is the health draining. You have very little and you do need to always take cover, which is even more realistic. Of course the difficulty can be decreased, but even on the lowest the combat can feel difficult most of the time, and could be a turn off for some people. In terms of shooting, unlike the first Far Cry game where you used a crosshair to shoot and it just becomes smaller and you're not actually aiming down your gun, and though it may have felt very satisfying, I much rather prefer the aiming down sight in Far Cry 2 and the actual use of iron sights in all of your weapons, meaning it's a lot more interactive and engaging like with a lot of the gameplay features compared to before. Another unique and detailed feature being the healing animations, with so many different versions of healing. Now this is when you're on your lowest health, as in one single bar, so it's always just a quick adrenaline syringe and not always a long animation. But because you're about to die and you bleed out at 1 bar, which is another realistic feature, this will trigger the various animations like a scalpel or a knife to remove a bullet from a wound, or even a dislocation and then popping it back in. It's ruthless for sure, and so unique compared to a simple heal. The loadouts are also a big improvement in this game. An AR, shotgun, pistol and a rocket launcher or an LMG is usually the loadout, mainly because it's primary, secondary, handgun and a special to choose from, so you can slot in whatever you want and it becomes very personalised and experimental, which is great. There's so many different weapons to choose from, which I won't name them all just because there's so many, but I thought the first game had a lot, and that was almost 20 years old. But even in the 2008 game, that has some of the highest amount of weapons to choose from in any story game I've played. Therefore it's always adding to the fun and being so different, which goes with all the features really in this game, and a great way to describe Far Cry 2. So that's where I wrap up this review. Overall, Far Cry 2 is a great and engaging experience, due to the endless amount of features not only in gameplay with so many unique mechanics that I was just blown away by, bearing in mind it's this old, even though it seems like some areas that took less thought in, whether that be the stealth and how it's more of an all guns blazing gameplay style, even if you want to switch it up yourself. However, even though it does go down this route, there's so much interaction and immersion in it, whether that be the array of weapons to decide from and which ones you'd like to implement in your loadout, the unique features and fights which you of course do plenty of, this being the healing animations, gun jamming or even exploding your gun, the realistic AI that are just so ruthless with no hesitation, meaning you do have to be very tactical when playing, even on the lowest difficulty. Then like in the stealth side, there's also other aspects that don't get the full treatment, that's being the repetitive missions of simply just gunfights, which it seems like that is the main focus of this game's story, even though the overall goal was to initially kill one person, which goes for a lot of the narrative and how overall it's quite confusing, but also entertaining for me personally. However, even if it isn't, this once again can be outweighed by the endless amount of features in those fights, then the overwhelming amount of bugs in almost every character you meet, with bobbing heads, broken animations, floating bodies and dialogue issues, which can take away the immersion for some people. Therefore, from all this, I'd mention that it's clear that some people will hear it and instantly fall in love with the style, from the areas I've spoken about, but some may not, and it's heavily down to personal preference. But if it does sound like your fancy from what I said from my review, then it's for sure still worth playing it today, and even if it isn't your thing, it's clear that this game still holds up fairly well after all these years. So I hope you did enjoy this Far Cry 2 review, and if you did, then please let me know by hitting that like button down below, and if story video game reviews are your thing, then maybe even considering subscribing to the channel as well. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you found it helpful. If you were thinking or not thinking of playing this game, like I said, I'll be playing the whole entire Far Cry series for the first time, with Far Cry 3 up next, and the previous game review is also up, that'll be in the description down below, and also at the end of this video. Of course it isn't just Far Cry, I have plenty of other reviews with a playlist for each game series, and I really hope you enjoyed it, and bye bye.